Ken Livingstone, welcome to Casual Politics. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure and for receiving us, and I'm very grateful for that. You need no introduction. You've been Mayor of London, Member of Parliament, leader of the GLC in the good old days.
Yeah.
So, and this year it marks the 30th anniversary of your entrance into Parliament. Do you miss your time back in Parliament?
Well, I'd like to be there at the moment, involved in all the struggles going on and supporting Jeremy. But actually, I think my time as an MP was the least productive time in politics, because you're just sitting there on the benches occasionally making a speech. I've always much preferred running things, like when I was leader of the GLC or mayor. I like to get things done rather than talk about what should be done.
And the transformations in Parliament, because last time I was interviewing George Galloway, and then he told me that there was a pager that you would have as an MP, and how like the sittings, the procedures, they now completely changed. Do you agree?
Oh, when I got in 30 years ago, Parliament really only got going at about 2:30 in the afternoon. We've gone usually till 10, often till 1 or 2 in the morning, sometimes all night. And then when Blair got in, they brought it much more a sort of normal working day. But I mean, what's got worse is that more and more MPs just do what they're told. You know, there used to be many more independent minds in Parliament. Blair's one of his biggest crimes was just not letting local Labour parties choose the candidate they wanted. They had to choose from an approved list of obsequious people who were just going on with whatever Blair wanted.
And they also on Wednesdays and Tuesdays asking questions from Lady Thatcher, who went on to abolish your council. It was a year before that you became Member of Parliament. Was it nerve-wracking for you?
Oh, well, it was amazing, because when I became the leader of the GLC, there was this wave of press hysteria and lies and smears, just like Jeremy's had to go through. And after 5 months, my poll rating was down to 18%. But, you know, Mrs Thatcher had to abolish the GLC election, because had it gone ahead, we would have won about 90% of the seats. So I think I'm like Jeremy, I don't give in to that media nonsense. You just plough on with what you believe. So there's some terrible points in it. But at the end of the day, Mrs Thatcher wasted 2 years of her second term abolishing the council. I think everyone now looks back on it as a disaster, because without anyone to run London, London started to decline. And when I became mayor, there'd been 14 years without any city administration. And big firms were saying, you've got to sort this out, or we're going to move to Frankfurt or Paris or whatever. I mean, you can't. There's no city anywhere in the world doesn't have an administration. I mean, otherwise it's a disaster.
And as a staunch Republican, you always praise the rule of the Queen and for not meddling into what Lady Thatcher was doing. Do you still believe that?
I'm in favour of a republic. I mean, our Queen's been very good. I mean, she's served the country. I was quite amazed, but at the height of Mrs Thatcher's campaign to abolish the GLC, her office got in touch with me to say she would like to come and open the Thames Barrier, which was mega coverage. It was global around the world. Thatcher hated her for doing that. So I think she's always done what she thinks right, and she served the country as a whole rather than whoever's sitting in Downing Street.
And when you first became Member of Parliament, your first speaker was Bernard Weatherall, and he would always wear a thimble. And do you think that John Baker has been modernised as Speaker of the House?
Well, I got on, although he was conservative. Bernard Weatherall was a very honest man. In the end, he let his Tory party membership lapse because he couldn't really agree with what Thatcher was doing. And he always called me fairly. I mean, when I was under attack in the House of Commons, he'd always call me and so on. So I really came to like him. We had a good working relationship. I've always gone on with Bercow. We used to, we went to the same gym when he became an MP, so we'd be wandering around naked and getting in and out of the showers together. So we had quite a friendly relationship, frankly.
And then when you were the leader of the GLC, John McDonough was in charge of your finance. So was he a good treasurer back then?
He was brilliant. I mean, he really worked. He was on top of the budget. Each budget he produced was no borrowing for revenue. Every budget was balanced. I mean, if the GLC hadn't been abolished, we were looking at paying off virtually all the GLC debt within a decade. A very sound man, absolute workaholic. The smear is that Labour spends too much and borrows too much. I mean, no one can accuse John McDonnell of that. I mean, he never borrowed a single penny for covering revenue expenditure.
And in the 1990s, you got many disagreements with your leader at the time, Tony Blair, which led him to expel you from the party, and you ran as an independent. So how difficult was it for you to not represent your loyal party as ever?
Well, I mean, it was just a groundswell of public support. I mean, that I had no intention of running for mayor initially. If Frank Dobson had announced right at the beginning he was going to do it, I'd have supported him. He would have been a very good mayor, a genuine Labour man. When he was leader of Camden Council, it became, well, it's like the best council in Britain in terms of the services and housing programme and so on. So, I mean, I wouldn't have run, but then, I mean, Frank didn't make up his mind until the last minute. And for some bizarre reason, I think Tony Blair had no idea what I was really like. He believed I was some sort of Trotskyist revolutionary that would try to overthrow his government or something. So they did all this ballot rigging. And it was so blatant. I mean, public opinion became massive. I couldn't walk down the street without people saying, you've got to run, you've got to run. And at the end of the day, it's quite clear, if I hadn't run, the Tories would have won. I mean, the public were not going to vote for the Labour nominee.
Was it
Steve Norris.
Norris.
And so, it just, it's like a tidal wave of public support, So I ended up going independent. But 3 years later, Tony Blair was saying, would you please come back and be our candidate?
Well, did you eventually reconcile with Tony Blair then?
Well, when he asked me to come back and be the candidate, I jumped at that because he was facing a local election in which they were going to lose virtually everything. I mean, and I would have been the one outstanding winner for Labour. But I also knew that he would work with me. I'd get more money, I'd get support for building things like Crossrail. And I mean, we never discussed the war. We just focused on the things we agreed in: more police for London, modernising our transport system. And that's why London had this huge boom, and I mean, people came from all over the world to work here and so on.
And as Mayor of London, you achieved lots, actually, to your credit, including bus passes for pensioners, for the elderly. But your greatest achievement, could we say that it was to secure a bid for the Olympic Games?
Well, I'd spent, in the sense, the most important achievement was actually bringing free travel on a bus and tube for pensioners. Because if we didn't have that today, an awful lot of pensioners wouldn't be able to live in London. I mean, it's so expensive. But the Olympic legacy is amazing because when the British Olympic Committee asked would we support their bid, we looked at the last 40 years, the 10 Olympics over the last 40 years, and the most significant was Barcelona, because the mayor of Barcelona had targeted the most rundown area and there was a real legacy. You look at Sydney, they scattered the stuff on the outskirts of the city. It ended up not being used. In Athens, it was spread all over the place, so people at the Olympic Games spent half their time moving from one place to another. So we thought one concentrated site, and the most polluted and neglected site anywhere in southern England. I mean, 100 years ago it was a booming hub of industry and docks and things like that, and it wasn't safe to be there. Now there's another 10 or 15 years of house building, new jobs coming. It's completely transformed what was the poorest and most polluted part of southern England, is now a booming hub.
And also the levels of crime have already have started to reduce as well significantly when you were mayor. So is it because of the coordination between the mayor and the prime minister which makes it very important for
Well,
the
it's quite interesting.
function of a great city as London?
When I became mayor, crime was going down everywhere in Britain except in London. It was still going up. And that was because London, Gordon Brown spent his first 2 years as Chancellor continuing with the Tories cuts. So we were losing police. I got elected. I think we had about 26,000 police. We lifted it up to 35,000. Crime dramatically fell. Because there were police there patrolling the streets, getting information. And I think a lot of kids growing up, they see police around all the time. They realise they're going to get caught if they do something bad. So no, getting the police back on the streets was the key, and we had a huge, when I became mayor, something like 20% of murders were going unsolved. By the time I finished my 8 years as mayor, it was down to 2%.
The first terrorist attack since the IRA, it was in 2005, and you always blamed Tony Blair for not coordinating enough with you. And are you being fair to him?
No, it's not coordinating. We got a lot of support. There were several previous terrorist attacks which we were able to stop, but eventually one will get through. His problem was that he was told, when he decided to invade Afghanistan and then Iraq, this will make us a target for terrorism, and that's inevitable.
That was inevitable. And also, as Mayor of London, you were very supportive of movies. You would go to movie premieres, including Venice with Peter O'Toole, Match Point with Woody Allen, and then also you launched London Actually, which was to boost film production in London. Are you a movie person yourself?
Literally, when I was born in 1945, so virtually no one had a television then. Every family would go out to the cinema 2 or 3 times a week. Now it sounds unbelievable now, but it was a really popular film. You turn up and the cinema was full and there'd be a queue all around the building waiting to get in, and you'd wait 2 hours to get in to see the next one. And then along came television and cinema attendance collapsed. But all through the 1980s, I would go to the cinema a couple of times a week, sometimes 3 times on a Saturday. We'd work out what are the best films and go. I've always loved the cinema. I occasionally take the kids to the cinema now, but of course now you can get it all on Netflix and everything else,
And your favourite actors or movies that they inspired you, shaped your character?
There's so many.
Dennis Skinner said that it was The King and I and On the Waterfront, Marlon Brando and F. Mary Sansa, which
I think
were yours.
It's just, literally I can't pin it down. I think I loved 1984, which actually came out in 1984. And that was the most significant book I ever read as a child. I learned more about how the world is from reading that than anything else. But there's just such a list of films I love. Things like Mission Impossible and so on.
Absolutely.
I always took kids to the Star Wars series and things like that. I liked good spy. I suppose The Spy Who Came In From the Cold was unbelievably good.
And when Boris Johnson he became mayor in 2008, he built up on your great legacies, such as Boris Bike. Is it sometimes irritating for you to look back and to think that actually he just ended up that legacy?
Well, I don't. It was. I thought it was really bad taste not to invite me to the openings of things I'd started building, like tram extensions and so on, and the upgrade of the North London line into the London Overground. But politics is a nasty old game. I don't mind him getting the credit for finishing the things I started. What fills me with despair is he carried on the things that I'd already signed the contract for, but the whole range of things we had coming along. I persuaded Corbyn Brown to give the Mayor's office £5 billion to start building council housing again. Johnson didn't take a penny, didn't build a house. We had a scheme ready to go to start to tackle air quality because we introduced the low emission zone. Boris just stopped any further work on that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have 9,500 people dying every year because of the air quality. And there was a whole range of other transport projects that we were working on, and another bridge across the east end of London. He just cancelled them all. It was appalling.
And in one of your interviews, you said one of your encounters after that you ceased to become to be the mayor of London with Boris, it was, and he kept on asking you about your political ambitions. Is that true? That
We only ever had one. Private, proper meeting. It was after the Olympic Games. He'd just been re-elected. I was retired. He took me out for dinner at a Turkish restaurant near where his home is. And I thought, this is my time to lobby and say, you've got to start building council houses and things like that. All he wanted to talk about was how it was I failed to become Prime Minister. What was the mistakes I made? And now
your
he
answers.
knows.
What did you answer?
I don't know. The Labour Party changed the rules, so it was very difficult for a left-winger to get enough nominations to stand. The party moved to the right, starting under Kinnock and then under Blair. And so no one expected Jeremy to win. It was electrifying at last, But normally, I could never get enough. Kinnock introduced this rule that 20% of Labour MPs had to nominate you or you couldn't stand. And that was just effectively a block I could never get.
How is he doing as Foreign Secretary?
I think Boris Johnson is a disaster because, he's not really a politician. He wants to be a celebrity. He should have gone into show business. He never masters detail. The 8 years he was mayor, he left all the work. He appointed a good deputy, Simon Milton, who'd been the leader of the Tory council in Westminster, and let him get on with it. I used to do a weekly press conference. I never left until I'd answered every question. Boris did about one a year. Everything was a photo opportunity. And I think had he become Prime Minister, it would have been a disaster because there is no plan, there is no idea where he wants to take Britain. It's just you want to stand there waving on the Downing Street steps.
And do you think that it's to Michael Gove's credit that he didn't become, and we indebted to...
The thing about Boris is he knows leaving the EU would be a disaster. But he thought if he was the figurehead leading that campaign, then when Cameron retired, he'd get all the old right-wingers supporting him, he'd get the job. And Gove was working with him very closely. He must have known Boris didn't believe a word he was saying. Whereas Gove, I don't agree with anything he says, does actually say what he believes and does fight for it. And so he pulled the rug on Boris, and thank God for that.
You talked about Jeremy Corbyn. You've known him since the 1960s or 70s.
Yeah, very early. He got elected to Haringey Council just when I got elected to Lambeth, and we were the sort of little left-wing group running around London. One of my biggest disappointments, he didn't come on the GLC with me. He was elected to Parliament in '83, and I think he would have been a really, really good person to have with me on the GLC. And
on the news, you were dubbed as terrorist sympathisers in the mid-'80s when you started negotiations much before Friday Agreement with Jay Adams and Martin McGuinness. So do you find that period very progressive?
Well, when I left school, I didn't go to university. Very few kids did at my age. I went and I spent 8 years working in a cancer research unit as a technician. And the doctors and the professors I worked with, they taught you to find the truth. So I came into politics, I've always said what I believe to be true. And we were all Thatcher's line was that the IRA weren't political, they were just psychopaths and criminals. And quite clearly, they were political, you had to resolve the political issue, or we'd still be having bombings today. And the moment I met Jerry Adams, I realised immediately, he was saying, we know we can't beat the British Army, there has to be a political deal. We're ready to talk now. And Thatcher refused, and we had another 10 years of another 1,000 lives lost because she didn't recognise that. And perhaps Blair's greatest legacy is he came into it without any preconceptions, sat down, did a deal. We've had peace for nearly 20 years.
And Martin McGuinness, he announced that he would stand down, and he did. Do you think that he's a loss to British politics?
Well, he is. I always liked him. He was as crucial as Gerry Adams in delivering that deal. But he's clearly very ill. And the strain of politics doesn't always do your health much good.
And are you optimistic about the election in Northern Ireland? And
it's amazing because for the first time
the power sharing will collapse.
Well, the first time that hasn't. Ever since we divided Ireland, back in almost 100 years ago, there has always been a hardline Protestant majority. Now there isn't. So for the first time, you're going to have a much better balanced government. It'll take some time.
Absolutely. And you, in the 80s, you were quite active, and you always said that you didn't support Michael Foot as leader because you knew that he would be a disaster. So why do you think that Jeremy Corbyn would be a successful leader?
I didn't think Michael would be a disaster. I loved him.
Well, you didn't vote for him.
Worked closely. I supported Dennis Healey because I think the public perceived Michael Foot as an academic, someone who floated above them, and we couldn't win. And I wouldn't have voted for Jeremy if I didn't think he could win. And given that nothing good is going to happen in the British economy from now through to 2020, I think we do have a chance of winning. You've got to have a coherent alternative economic strategy, and that's what Jeremy's got. Massive programme of public sector investment. You don't need to increase taxes on ordinary people. You just need to stop Google and Starbucks and Amazon not paying their fair share of tax. No one knows how much tax avoidance and evasion there is. The government claims it's only 20 billion. But some academics put it as much as 120 to even 150. Well, that's more than a quarter of the government's budget. You could do everything like the teachers, the nurses, the doctors without increasing taxes a penny. You just got to stop them evading.
But Michael Foot had a track record of ministerial achievements, including social contract when he became leader. But Jeremy Corbyn, he's never been. He's never had a post.
No, but that's the weakness of Kinnock and Blair. One of the reasons I supported Dennis Healey was he would have reached out. Tony Benn said, we were chatting about this, Tony Benn said, of course, he would have offered me a major job immediately. Whereas Kinnock and then Blair excluded everyone from the left. Parliament is not so laden with talent. You can afford to ignore people who've got talent.
So do you think that Jeremy Corbyn, he needs to bring back people like Derek Hatton, who got expelled from George Galloway?
Well, Derek Hatton, I didn't get on with. The militant tendency was deeply conservative with a small c. On issues of race, sexuality, women's rights, they were so backward. They were as bad as the worst Tories. And George Galloway, I think he's going to he has much more impact by constantly appearing on our screens.
And Russia Today.
He's almost as old as I am, There's that generation of people coming through the party now, because perhaps the most important legacy of Ed Miliband is he allowed Labour parties to choose the candidate they wanted. So
one member, one vote.
Yeah, but they didn't have to choose from an approved list or anything like that. So the intake in 2015, much higher proportion of them voted for Jeremy than the ones before. And a lot of them, I think, have real potential.
But the polls, all the polls they show, and they were produced by John Trickett, who is in Jeremy Corbyn, that you would do a disaster in the next snap election. Let's call it a snap election. So how could you
I'm not
say
saying
that?
it will, because when you get to the at the moment, all we get from the media is trivia about Jeremy.
Including the BBC. Do you
And they're
think
just
that they've
as
been biased?
Oh yeah, I mean they always have been. I mean, I think what the key thing is, when you hit the general election, you get those debates, and there will be Corbyn and May discussing the serious issues, and millions will watch them. And so, until you hit that election, it's very difficult to overcome the fact that the vast bulk of our newspapers are owned by billionaires who are all tax dodgers. They will do everything to stop Jeremy winning. But when you hit the general election, you have to have those debates. I mean, perhaps 4, perhaps even 5.
And you are on the Labour Defence Committee, and 2 weeks ago, Labour, they did not very good in Copeland, and it was due to Jeremy Corbyn's stance on the nuclear plant. So what's Jeremy Corbyn's views in regards to nuclear?
Well, I mean, the simple fact is there's no point Britain having a nuclear deterrent. You have America and Russia who have got thousands of nuclear weapons, and then I think France has got about 60, we've got about 30 or 40. I mean, we've got enough nuclear weapons to start a world war, but not to finish one. And they're about status. I think too many prime ministers love the knowledge that I can press this button and start a war. The truth is, the threats we face are from terrorism, from global warming. We'd be much better spending that money and beefing up our armed services so you can defeat ISIS and Osama bin Laden's legacy. Or you could use the money. Remember the terrible floods we had over a year ago, the worst we've ever had. People are more and more vulnerable. I mean, there are much better ways of saving our lives than having 4 nuclear submarines, usually only ones at sea at any one time. And I mean, we've never been under threat of a nuclear attack from Russia.
And now with Brexit, we're going through very crucial times, not only for my generation, but also for generations to come. So, and for that, we need a strong opposition to hold the government into account. Do you think that the Labour Party in the Lords, they've been much stronger under the leadership of the leader in the House of Lords than Jeremy Corbyn in the Commons?
I mean, the thing is, the Tories don't have a majority in the House of Lords. But they do have one in the House of Commons. And I mean, what I said earlier about why I didn't really enjoy the House of Commons, you have these people shouting and jeering. I mean, I loathe that. I mean, I want to see a serious debate, not, something like a load of old drunks on Saturday nights or jeering.
Yeah, and so what about Scotland? Jeremy Corbyn said last week that he wouldn't mind if they become independent.
Well, whether it's Catalonia in Spain or Scotland here, if locally people vote for independence, I think you have to respect that. All I would say to the Scots was...
Well, it's not the right time, do you agree?
Well, there isn't going to be a right time because the last referendum, the oil price was twice what it is now. And even then, if they'd gone independent, they would have had to have a subsidy from England to prop them up. I mean, the deficit on their budget, I think, is about 8% of their economy, which is kind of, no Western countries anything like that. And so, I mean, unless the oil price goes up to $150 a barrel, they're not economically viable.
But it seems to lots of people that Jeremy Corbyn, he's aware of the problems, but he couldn't put them onto the Prime Minister, as last week when the national insurance tax was discussed, and then when the government, they did a U-turn on it, Jeremy Corbyn was impotent to hold the Prime Minister into account.
The simple fact was that she was going to make, that statement was going to be made by the Chancellor after Prime Minister's questions. And if Jeremy had wasted 6 questions asking her, she would just...
He knew it 20 minutes before they proceed.
Yeah, he knew what was coming,
Yes.
But she wouldn't have answered the questions. She would have wasted 6 questions. She would have said, wait to hear what the Chancellor says. That's the problem. If it had been a couple of days away, Jeremy would have gone, right for a throat on it.
And if ever you're needed in Parliament, would you stand to go and help your long-term friend,
I do-
Jeremy Corbyn?
I mean, it's not just Jeremy. I would have done anything Ed Miliband asked me to do. But, you know, you have to bear in mind, I'm soon going to be 72. And by the time of the next general election, I'll be 75. So I once said, you know, unless Germany needs a minister for Zimmer frames.
Dennis Skinner is 85.
And but he's not going to go into government either. And I mean, but since I stopped being mayor, my wife's become a teacher. I'm here looking after the kids. I'm a house husband now.
And what are the challenges that Jeremy Corbyn will face over the next 4 years, until 2020 as leader? What are the challenges that he will face as leader of his party?
I mean, the key thing is just to focus on the economy. We had all the smears about anti-Semitism. Then we had all the attacks saying it's Jeremy's fault we voted for Brexit.
What happened to that report commissioned by Baroness Chakrabarti was the only reason that she got her way through the House of Lords. But what happened to that report? Is it?
Well, the report broadly came to the conclusion that we didn't have a problem with anti-Semitism. You had in a party of 500,000 people, you'd had half a dozen who'd said stupid and rude things about Jews. And I mean, literally, this was all whipped up by those Labour MPs trying to undermine Jeremy. Because let's talk about anti-Semitism rather than the economy. And then let's talk about Brexit. It's Jeremy's fault. You know, exactly the same MPs moved on. Now, there is a handful of embittered old Blairites, and they will carry on, but the vast majority of other Labour MPs realise, I mean, Jeremy's not going to be removed, he's going to be there, and they've stopped undermining him. And I think it will slowly turn around. Nothing's quick in politics.
If there's an election, there will be an election in 2020, if not before. So would you like to see those MPs getting diselected?
Oh, I'd love to, yes. I mean,
Would you
when I
name
was,
a few names?
well, all those that have been undermining Jeremy, but I mean, when we changed the rules so that in 1980, we changed the rules so that each MP was subject to reselection, which is exactly the same as in America. Every president has to win the primaries to stand again. Every senator, every member of the House of Representatives. There's nothing undemocratic about giving the party membership the right to decide this. And we introduced that in 1980. There wasn't a great wave of MPs being selected. I was the MP here in Brent East. The right wing put up 2 candidates against me. I didn't object to that. They got a right to do it. People didn't agree with my politics. They had a right to vote for someone else.
Why is he so unable to reach out to a wider section in his party?
Well, Jeremy has reached out to the vast majority of our party members. It's just
Well, it's not
this
enough
layer of
to
MPs.
win an election. You
But-
know it.
No, I think I would not have voted for Jeremy if I didn't think he could win. And I just think back to how low my poll ratings were when I became leader of the GLC. And then, 4 years later, Thatcher had to abolish that election because we would have won 90% of the seats. So come back and interview me in 2 years when we're much closer to the next general election. I think it'll be a very different situation.
And the media, they've been quite biased. So what are the lessons to draw from all that?
I'd simply say to people, don't buy the Daily Telegraph, the Daily Mail, or Murdoch's papers, because they're all filled with lies.
What about the Evening Standard with George Osborne as the new editor today? It was announced.
It's awful. Under Max Hastings, back at the end of the last century, it was a really good paper that told you what's happening in London. And then when he retired from it, they brought in Veronica Wadley, who just turned it into a propaganda sheet for the right.
And
we shouldn't allow billionaires to own our papers.
And what are the challenges that we will face over the next 5 years? The United Kingdom will face, and you're worried.
Well, the biggest challenge we face is global warming, and we're seeing. I think scientists very much understate. They don't exaggerate. They're very honest. They won't make a claim based on what they suspect. They wait till they can prove. And we're now seeing the violence of our weather all over the world accelerate much more rapidly than we thought. And I do think there's a real chance that by the end of this century, humanity and most species will have been wiped out. And so this should be our top priority, and we need to tackle it right now. I mean, every country is consuming more and more. The level of waste in our society now, the stuff that's dumped in the waste bins day after day, all of that's led to carbon emissions being created, depletion of our natural resources. And so I think we need to remember what we are as a species, which is that it's not what we own or our possessions, it's our relationship in our family, with our friends and our workmates.
As mayor, you were quite involved with the Clinton Foundation, and you signed an agreement. So how seriously it was taken on board?
The Clinton Foundation, we set up the C40, which is the 40 largest cities to collaborate on tackling climate change. And then Clinton came along and threw the weight of his foundation behind it. And I have many disagreements with Clinton, as I had with Blair, but on this he's right and he's been doing the right thing. Now, the C40 has grown. Effectively, it's about 80 cities in it now. And I think about a quarter of the world's GDP is covered by those cities. And they're collaborating and doing a lot of work. But governments are so slow to react. And they're frightened of telling people we must consume less. Because for the last 75 years, 70 years, the world's been about consuming more and more and more. I mean, people spend their time going out shopping rather than spending it with their friends and family.
And two last questions. Theresa May, she said that she would start her negotiations by the end of March. So how would you like her to negotiate our terms to keep us out of the European Union?
I think we should be quite honest.
Would we be a successful country?
People who voted to leave were told, we can vote to leave, we'll get control of our borders, but we'll be able to stay in the single market. That was a big lie. And if I was a member of Parliament, I'd be simply saying, I'm not voting for anything unless it allows us to stay in the single market, because leaving will be a catastrophe. We will lose hundreds of thousands of jobs.
Do you think that it was the question which was a problem? Because back in 1975, the question was, would you or not, to have access to a common market?
Well, it was. But for the ever since Thatcher came to power, we've seen good jobs that working class people had wiped out. We used to have 7 million jobs in manufacturing, now we've got under 2 million. Instead, now people are having insecure, low-wage jobs, or they're on 0 hours contracts. Their quality of their life's been diminished. And it used to be you could afford to buy a home. If you couldn't afford to buy a home, you could get one from the local council. Thatcher stopped building council housing. And what the politicians and press have done is said, the reason we haven't got good jobs and good homes is because immigrants have taken them. Well, no, it's British governments, Thatcher, Blair, Cameron, haven't built them and created them.
And lastly, Tony Benn once said, I was a national threat once and now I'm a national treasure. How would you like to remember?
Tony Benn wasn't a threat against the nation. He was a threat to that small elite that rip us off and steal all our money. In that 35 years after the Second World War, inequality dramatically reduced, people had a better life. Since Thatcher came to power, inequality now is as bad as it was in 1914. And anyone who's a threat to that small, ultra-rich elite is demonised.
How would you like to remember it?
I don't care. When you're dead, you're dead. I do not believe in an afterlife.
No.
I've left my autobiography. People can read it and make up their own mind.
Yeah, well, we shall wait and see. Well, on that note, thank you very much, Ken Livingstone.
Bye.
Great, thank you.